Which triangle team is going to go the farthest in the NCAA tournament between NC State and Duke? Plus, what's next for UNC after failing to make the tournament and opting out of the NIT? Welcome to Triangle and Two. I'm Luis Fernandez. He's Mark Bergin. Mark, let's just get straight into it because we got a lot to talk about. Duke, first team, highest seed in the triangle in terms of the NCAA men's basketball tournament. They're going to be matched up against Oral Roberts. Your preliminary thoughts?
Luis, it's my favorite time of the year, and I get to be graced with your presence today. We're suiting up. You've got the tie on. It's March Madness is here. St. Patrick's Day is here on Friday. I am fired up, and we're going to start with Duke. I think to answer your question right off the top, Luis, Duke is the answer because of the matchup problems that they can create. And we talked about this some before the start of the ACC tournament. To me, it's as simple as the twin towers that you have, Dereck Lively's presence defensively, Kyle Filipowski's offensive prowess on the offensive end. Two freshman players, two players who can cause matchup nightmares for opposing teams. And they're going to go as far as those two players carry them. And I like the guard play by Jeremy Roach as well, the junior guard as well. I have faith in him. I think Duke's going to get it done in the first round. Really, to me, the next question then lies, how far can the Blue Devils go in the tournament?
I do think Duke has the more favorable bracket setup. I think the East is going to be a little bit easier to get through than the South that NC State is in. Being in the same bracket as, or the same region as number one Alabama, number one seed overall Alabama is definitely tricky. But before we even start looking ahead to round 2, Sweet 16, Elite 8, we got to start with the first round. Duke will be facing Oral Roberts, which, you know, one of those teams that you don't think about until the brackets are released every year. No offense to Oral Roberts. No offense to all the folks who, where is Oral Roberts? I don't even know. No offense to any of them, but they present a really interesting matchup because of what they can do offensively. You're going to have a little bit of Duke's defense battling against Oral Roberts' offense. If you don't like stats, I'm sorry, this may not be the episode for you. I'm over here like spending way too long on KenPom, like looking at like effective field goal percentage and stuff like that. But with Oral Roberts, what's so interesting is, so KenPom wise, they are number 56 team overall in KenPom. So it's not like they are some totally out of the blue, no one's going to talk about them type squad. They are number 23 in terms of offensive efficiency and number 107 in terms of defensive efficiency. So what that tells me is they're a little bit up and down. They're going to be a little bit inconsistent just as a team overall when facing some of this more elite competition because of that difference between offensive and defensive efficiency. But when you look at effective field goal percentage, which, by the way, just for those that don't know, is a formula that combines 2-point field goals and 3-point field goals and gives a little bit more weight to three-pointers since they're technically worth more points. They're 56.1% effective field goal percentage, which is number 7 in the country. So long story short, they can shoot it. And so how is Duke's defense going to respond? That's going to be big.
Luis, I'm glad you did your homework on the Summit League.
Oh, thank you.
And I had to do some brushing up myself. And it's like, okay, who is Duke going to need to stop? Oral Roberts has a senior named Max Ambas, Conference Player of the Year twice, averaging more than 22 a game. And so he's really the player that Duke's going to need to stop. I'd imagine they'll put Mitchell on Ambas to try to slow him down on the offensive end. And Oral Roberts has 2 other double-digit scorers, Connor Vanover and Isaac McBride as well. And so, yeah, I mean, Luis, you hit the nail on the head saying, like, we don't, you know, some of these teams, there's 68 different teams, a lot of them not from a Power 5 conference. So it's just like, okay, got to do your homework on kind of getting to know your opponent a little bit more. This is not one of those 5-12 matchups where I expect the 12 seed to win. And I hope I'm not joking, or I hope I'm not jinxing the Blue Devils here, because if I am, hey, feel free to roast me in the comments for those watching on YouTube.
I do think that you're gonna end up seeing Duke's defense having to make their money here. Truly, you look at tempo as well, and Oral Roberts is one of the faster tempo teams in the country, so they're going to try and speed it up. But if there's one thing we saw about this Duke team is that they are good at making the pace their own and doing what they want to do offensively and defensively. So that is going to be really interesting for me to see. Another thing to kind of keep in mind with this Oral Roberts team, they don't turn over the ball at all. They are the top team in terms of lowest turnovers per possession. So only 12.9% of their possessions end in turnovers, which is, like I said, the lowest in the country. So Duke is going to have to play defense and do their best to, get defensive rebounds versus allowing them to, pick and pop and do whatever they want on offense. Oral Roberts, that is. You mentioned also the win streak, Mark.
Yeah, Lewis, both teams are super hot entering this tournament. Oral Roberts has won 17 in a row. Duke's won 9 in a row. Head coach Jon Scheyer in his first season trying to become the first head coach to win the national title since Steve Fisher all the way back in 1989. So the narratives are already starting to write themselves where it's like, well, Duke couldn't get it done in the Final Four last year and Coach K's 42nd final season at Duke. With this team, Duke is hot at the right time. And there's a reason they got back into the AP top 25 last week, Lewis. Going into the tournament, the Blue Devils are playing their best basketball. And you said this earlier too, the defense is what's really stuck out to me, where they make it really, really tough for opposing offense to put the ball in the basket.
Mm-hmm. And then if you look, like, let's say hypothetically, they do come out on top of the matchup against Oral Roberts, they're going to have to play the winner of Tennessee and Louisiana Lafayette, which is another interesting matchup, because if it's chalk and Tennessee comes through, that's one of the best defensive teams in the country. So then you're getting, kind of strength against strength there with two defensive teams going against each other. Ziegler, the Tennessee starting point guard, tore his ACL a couple of weeks ago. So that's, I believe, in the last week of the regular season. So that's something to keep an eye out for if how Tennessee responds to that, how they continue to move forward with that. I believe after that game, they ended up beating the team that they were playing. They lost to Auburn in the regular season finale, I believe. I need to double check that. But then they lost very early on in the SEC tournament. So right now, it feels like a lot of people are kind of leaning towards a Louisiana Lafayette upset there against Tennessee. So then you kind of start once again having to look at, what's Duke's defense going to do in that. I think that, there is a solid chance that we could see Duke moving on to the Sweet 16, just based on what their region of their section of the East region looks like.
And Lewis, let me piggyback off this really quickly. We both spent times in our career in Knoxville, Tennessee, so we're very familiar with Rick Yeah. But then ahead of this week's matchup against Oral Roberts too, Duke's a 6.5-point favorite entering this game. Gambling not quite legal. Online sports gambling not quite legal yet in North Carolina. That bill's coming in the legislature, but a 6.5-point favorite. I was surprised that this number wasn't higher. And what I'm curious to see, Lewis, is does this line shift between now and tip off later this week?
Yeah, that 12-5 matchup is always intriguing. So I wonder if that's kind of factoring into what people's thought process is with that. So that's Duke. We kind of have a good idea of what we're looking at there. Let's go and move on to NC State, a team that I think NC State fans were starting to get a little nervous going into that 6 p.m. selection show. Worried that, hey, we're on the bubble. What side of the bubble are we going to fall on? A lot of the bracketologists had NC State landing in Dayton, playing in the first 4. And instead, they land squarely on the right side of the bubble. They are the number 11 seed in the South region. They are playing number 6 seed Creighton. What are your first thoughts on that matchup, Mark?
It's going to be tough. And so NC State opens as a 5-point underdog. I love the guard play, but NC State's just been shaky in this last month of the tournament. But hey, you got to get in the dance to be able to compete. And welcome back, Kevin Keatts. First time the Wolfpack have gotten in since 2018. It's been too many moons, Lewis. I will say this. I'm sorry?
Quite a lot of moons. Quite a lot.
Yes,
of moons.
Too many moons. Too many moons. I will say this, with the guard play of NC State, if they can get hot, that can carry a team in March. So we all know Jarkel Joiner, Terquavion Smith. Don't forget as well about guard Casey Morsell, and then the big fella. I absolutely love him, DJ Burns. He can score in one-on-one matchups if you don't double team him. So if they can be hot shooting, it's just like, what Wolfpack team are you going to get? Are you going to get the team that's white hot and can knock out Virginia Tech, the reigning ACC champions, in the tournament? Or are you going to have matchup problems? What we saw with Miami, they put Burns in the screen role, put him out in space, and forced him to defend players out on the perimeter, which is something he's not as adept at doing. It's going to be tough for the Wolfpack. I won't lie to you as an 11 seed, but they have the guards to do it. It's just a matter of like which team's going to show up, Lewis, and that's the big question mark between now and later this week.
Yeah, I love you bringing up Casey Morsell and his three-point shooting ability because he has been one of the best stories for NC State this season. But we talk about the guards, and yes, if Jarkel Joiner and if Terquavion Smith just go Super Saiyan and just go off and they both are scoring 20 plus, that would go very far. Guard play carries in the NCAA tournament, but I'm super intrigued by the matchup down low between DJ Burns and Creighton center Ryan Kalkbrenner. I looked up how to pronounce his name in the WRAL Sports Plus bracket breakdown. I had no idea how to say his name. I was like, I think it's something like this. Ryan Kalkbrenner. He was the Big East Defensive Player of the Year. He was first team All Big East. He's averaging 15 points, 6 rebounds, 2 blocks. That to me is going to be the difference because if DJ Burns can stay out of foul trouble, if he can do what he wants to do against Kalkbrenner, and that requires them to bring over someone to help double team, that will be so big for NC State. But if you can put Kalkbrenner on an island against DJ Burns, that is going to be some trouble. So how that matchup plays out, I think will be a big part of what happens with this game. Also, just when, I'm bringing up the stats again, but when you look at KenPom and when you look at what Creighton does, KenPom has Creighton as the 13th team in the country. As a 6 seed, that is disrespectful for Creighton. And if there's one thing you don't want in these first round matchups, it's to be matched against those teams that are very poorly placed. I look at Texas A&M as another example. They're a 7 seed. Are you kidding me? They're so much better than a 7 seed. So that is an unfortunate luck of the draw for State. I do think it's going to be difficult. I think what State is going to have to rely on is shooting well from outside. I look at Creighton's just their defensive effective field goal percentage. They're 47.3 is what they're allowing opponents, which is 41st in the country. So they're a good defense. I think a lot of that has to do with Kalkbrenner and what he brings on the interior. So you're going to have to try and get hot from outside. When I look at what State brings to the table from an offensive perspective, and excuse me as I shuffle my giant notepad, if you hear that in the background, they're going to have to get hot from outside. State's one of the best teams in terms of not turning the ball over. They're at 13.2 turnover per possession percentage, which is top 5 in the country. And Creighton doesn't force a lot of turnovers either. So, keep the possessions the way you want. State does well offensive rebounding. They're top 100, rebounding about 30% of their opportunities for offensive rebounds. So if you can get those second chance points, I think that goes a long way for the Wolfpack. It's going to be really interesting just to see. I think they're going to have to dominate the boards and do their best. They're going to have to win those one-on-one matchups with DJ Burns and Kalkbrenner, and just make sure that Kalkbrenner does not become a problem. As I'm sure Creighton is going to make sure that DJ Burns does not become a problem for them. But I look at that matchup, and then I look at Terquavion Smith and Jarkel Joiner, just like you were saying.
Totally with you there, Lewis. And let me flip that on you too. You mentioned DJ Burns staying out of foul trouble. Let's get Kalkbrenner in foul trouble.
Sure, yeah.
Get him off the floor. So I think that would be key to where make him beat you. And I know that you see the 2.2 blocks per game, but if you can consistently attack him, get him off the floor early, I think that would be the key for me is, hey, let's be aggressive and force him to make plays at the rim. Let's go right at him, Lewis, because 5 fouls, it's especially in the tournament. If depending on how the referees are calling the game early on to it, might be tight early.
Yeah, and that's going to be key. Creighton is very good at playing defense without fouling. So that's going to be key is what do the refs do in that situation? I mean, because it's one game at a time, right? It's one matchup at a time. So if you get some officials who are going to be calling ticky-tacky stuff, that's going to adjust everything. So it's going to be tough for NC State.
Let me bring up 2 other points, Lewis, here. Number 1, Creighton coach Greg McDermott, no stranger to the NCAA tournament. It's his 13th year with the Blue Jays. Last year's team made the Sweet 16. You're saying Greg McDermott, he's the father of Doug McDermott, former Creighton star, NBA player. And then Lewis, How about the last 2 times that these 2 teams have played in Paradise? Back in 2016, we're in the Virgin Islands, and then all the way back in 1987 in Honolulu, Hawaii. That's like the dream assignment. The 2 teams have split the series in the 2 previous matchups.
Virgin Islands, Honolulu, Denver, Colorado. I don't see the difference. I don't see the difference. What's maybe a little bit colder.
3 slices of paradise. Louis.
Yeah, something like that. But I think so now if we look, that's the first round. If State were to advance to the second round this weekend, they would be playing the winner of Baylor and UC Santa Barbara. And I know talking a little bit before about Baylor having the potential to go very far in this tournament. Let me be a little bit. I'll kind of counter that for you really quick, right? So if I look up Baylor on KenPom really quick, what you see is they're rated as the number 2 adjusted offense, which is points scored per 100 possessions, right? So they score 121 points per 100 possessions, which anything over 1 point per possession is pretty good. Defensively, they give up 101 points per 100 possessions, the 104th adjusted defense according to KenPom. So that's 2 versus 104. And when you look at what causes upsets and what causes runs, it's teams just like that. If Baylor goes cold shooting, they could be in trouble. You saw that happen over the past couple of weeks when they played Iowa State. If Baylor struggles in terms of shooting, and they're very good, obviously, but if they do have one of those nights where things get a little bit cold, it is college basketball after all. It's not the most beautiful basketball most of the time. Then what you end up seeing is those teams getting upset. But the flip side of that is a team like that, if they get really hot and if they lean into that strength, they could go on a long run. So when I look at Baylor, I see a team that is going to be kind of either feast or famine. That's kind of what I see with Baylor in this NCAA tournament. So if State were to pull this upset, then it's going to be which Baylor team do they get? Assuming Baylor wins. No disrespect to UC Santa Barbara. That's one of the things to watch as this part of the South region unfolds.
Louis, any other thoughts about NC State? And then we get to discuss my favorite topic of what's next for North Carolina.
Only thing I'll say is I'm still really upset that they didn't end up being the 8 or 9 seed in Houston's region. I think that would have been really fun seeing like a second game matchup. Houston, NC State, 40 years after the Cardiac Pack 1983 run. That would have felt very poetic to me, but sometimes life does not imitate art, apparently.
I'm going to have to pop on the 30 for 30 survive in advance as soon as we're done recording, Louis, because I'm right there with you 40 years later. I want to go to UNC out of the tournament, declining the NIT invitation as well. Louis, you're a great reporter. You're a great media member, but I want you to take that hat off and put your fan hat on for just a second here. So was there any part of you disappointed that the Tar Heels aren't playing in the NIT?
So for those of you who don't know, I graduated undergrad from UNC. So we'll just put that out there. Come at me if you feel like I'm being biased in any way, shape, or form now or in the future. So I have thought long and hard about this because it is a very charged topic. Oh my gosh. The replies underneath the comments from UNC, the statements, wow, just charged. I think it's kind of, there are a few sides to this, right? First off, anytime a blue blood program, anytime a high profile program does not make the NCAA tournament and has the potential to play in the NIT, it is a lose-lose situation. You accept, everyone makes fun of you for being a part of the NIT. You decline, everyone says you're an elitist and you think you're better than the NIT. I think it's kind of twofold here. What the question I'm sure Hubert Davis and the rest of the UNC staff asked was, what is best for this basketball team and this basketball program moving forward? I think that with that in mind, they made the decision that they felt would be best, which was essentially, hey, let's regroup. Let's figure out what's going on with this team moving forward, because it's obvious watching this UNC team, the issues are a lot deeper than just not playing this, not shooting this. There are some interior, deep perspective questions they have to answer. And if the best thing to do that is to just say the season is done, we're moving forward, then hey, that's what you got to do. So I don't have an issue with it from that perspective. Is it a little disappointing to not compete when you have the opportunity to compete? Yes, I think that's also fair. I think that ultimately this is a lose-lose situation for UNC.
Yeah.
Whatever they decide to do, the transfer portal opens up today. So if you start seeing activity there from a UNC perspective, maybe that puts things into a little bit more context here. I think that based on how the season started for UNC and how the season ended for UNC, they've opened themselves up for criticism, whether that is deserved or not. Most cases deserved. They have opened themselves up for criticism, and they have to just kind of eat that humble pie. That's just how it is in this situation. Is it fair? I don't know. Some ways yes, some ways no. But you gotta put your money where your mouth is, and they failed to do that this year.
Let me piggyback off this, Lewis, with your point about it being a lose-lose. If you accept the NIT bid and win is the preseason number one, it's like, well, you were supposed to do this anyway, given the competition in the NIT and that those teams weren't good enough to make the field of 68 in the NCAA tournament. So that's what you're talking about as well. And at least in the immediate run, like, do you want me to go through the stats really quickly of how historic UNC not making the tournament is, Lewis? Do you want me to go to which players are back next year? Do you want me to go to recruits? I can go in a lot of different directions here. Tell me and I'll take off in any direction.
Well, see, and this is when I start thinking of like, man, it's time for the season to be over. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like, I think that's where things are with this UNC team is it's time for the season to be over.
Yeah.
I think of like, there's kind of two ways to look at this NIT situation from a team perspective, right? There were a lot of young players on UNC's team that did not get a lot of reps this year. The Jalen Washingtons of the world, the Tyler Nichols of the world, like those type of players. That Seth Trimble, seeing him get more reps would have been great. And the NIT could serve as an opportunity for that. So you have that half of things, and then you have the other half of the more experienced players, the starters, who were essentially getting all the stuff. Pete Nance, his time is done. He only had 1 year left. You had Leaky Black. His career at UNC is done. Just like that. Boom. Armando Bacot has to make a decision. He has 1 more year he could come back for that COVID year. Where do we go from there? You have Caleb Love and RJ Davis, who are more experienced players, but they have decisions to make as well. So I don't know. What do you think, Mark? What is? I feel like I've talked a lot during all of this. What are your thoughts on? It kept me up last night, man. Just thinking about the
well, no more lemon Oreos for you, Lewis.
No more lemon Oreos for everyone.
But okay. The questions you have to ask is who's coming back? Is Bacot going to the league? Love, RJ Davis. Personally, it's just my prediction. I think both Bacot and Love will go. I think Davis will be back. We'll see. I could totally be wrong about that. That's just my best guess. So then you also ask yourself the question of, really not the question, but who's coming in? And I look at the recruiting classes, and this is not to put too much pressure on any freshmen coming in. 2023 class, you've got 2 players coming in. 2024, you're loaded.
Yeah, exactly.
And you got some studs coming in. So you got to be patient with Hubert Davis. This team will be back in March Madness a year from now. I'm calling this right now. You got to be patient from him. But the frustration, Lewis, lies with this. When you're not making the tournament for the first time since 2010, we all know since the field expanded to 64 teams in the mid-'80s, UNC's the first team not to make it as preseason number 1. First AP preseason number 1 to have multiple 3-game losing streaks in a single season. And I got one other for you too, speaking of the triangle teams. By missing the NCAA tournament, the Tar Heels' first preseason number 1 team to miss the NCAA tournament since NC State in 1974, 1975. And those are the stakes you're talking about.
And you know what NC State didn't do after missing the tournament? They didn't play in the NIT that season. Interesting. But like I think the context of all that is important, Mark. Thank you. But I think ultimately, like, there's a lot of criticism for UNC now that the season is over, and it's deserved. Like you can sit here and be upset that people are coming at you with the intensity that they are. We know the toxicity of sports social media. Like that's not any different. That's something that's been around since social media has been around. But you gotta just have to eat it. That's just what it is. You made your bed, and now you gotta lay in it. Like that's just where UNC is at. So even if ultimately this is the right decision to not play in the NIT tournament, that feels a little bit like the Atlantic Coast Conference. Even if they make the right decision here, at least in the immediate, they have to deal with the backlash of what people are going to say and going to be upset about. I think I get it. I do. I get not playing the NIT, but you're just going to have to take it. That's all you can do at this point.
Lewis, I'm not one to wish my life away, but come 2024 and I look at the mixtapes, Elliot Cadeau, Ian Jackson, I'm telling you, man, be patient if you're a Tar Heels fan, because greener pastures are coming. You're going to be back in a title game before you know it. I'm just calling this right now. Stay the course. Be patient. We want instant gratification as a society, and it's okay. This team was going to finish what they started last season. They were just short in the title game a year ago against KU, and trying to build on that. Every season's a little bit different, but I see the caliber of recruits you got coming in. Again, beyond 2023, try to see the forest between the trees, Lewis.
I think at this point, we're going to learn a lot about Hubert Davis as a head coach next year. That next year, the year after that, those are going to be very big for him and his tenure at UNC. So, it's funny. I don't think there's going to be as much pressure on them next year as there was this year, obviously being the preseason number one, but it's not exactly a whole lot different either. It's going to be really interesting to see what UNC does next year. But, Mark, there is another UNC basketball team that is still playing.
Hey, there we go. There we go.
Oh, transition. Oh, got him. And now we have the women's teams. And before we end things, we just really wanted to go ahead and touch on them. Local teams from a women's perspective, you have UNC women's basketball, NC State women's basketball, Duke's women's basketball, and hey, ECU. I know it's not the Triangle, but still, ECU, also their women's basketball team is in the NCAA tournament as well. And so they'll get started and play through. I think NC State and NC State men's and women's are both playing in the West on Friday. One playing in Salt Lake City, one playing in Denver. Do you have the other details of what times and where everyone else is playing on?
You put me on the spot here. Listen, this information is on WRALSportsFan.com, so you can check out our coverage there. Lewis, on the back end, I was writing a lot of the stories, and you were on TV doing your thing, breaking down all the matchups with the brackets. And it's tough enough with 68 with just the men's. You had the women's to the VIX, and it's just like, look, the Triangle team's showing out this year because you get two from the men's portion. You get all three Triangle teams making the tournament, playing this upcoming weekend, and that's what makes this weekend so great. Get the St. Patrick's Day celebration too, Lewis. Again, not one to wish my life away. Get me in front of a TV Thursday. I can't wait.
Duke, I know, yeah. I think Duke women's basketball is also, they're hosting on Saturday, and so you could see Duke men's and women's, if Duke makes it to the second round, playing on the same day as well. So a lot of really interesting stuff. You can go to WRALSportsFan.com for the rest of the information. We'll be sure to give you the best coverage as possible from that. So keep an eye on the men's teams, the women's teams. It's the most wonderful time of the year, Mark Bergin.
Yeah, Duke's going to play Iona, and that is on. They're going to be playing in Durham as well. That's on Saturday. North Carolina is going to play the winner of the Purdue-St. John's play-in game. So that will be Saturday in Columbus, Ohio. And then NC State's got Princeton. And again, that on Friday, Lewis. So we'll put all this information in the show notes on YouTube as well. So if viewers are like, hey, can I get that information again? We'll make sure we include that here in the show link as well, Lewis.
Absolutely. All right. So there you go. Just a couple of weeks into Triangle and Two, but we already got a lot that we're talking about. Keep an eye out for Panthers free agency as well. The free agent negotiation period in the NFL starting today at noon. So when things get started for real in a few days, that's going to be a fun time in the NFL. I'm sure the Panthers will find a way to keep things interesting after trading for the number one pick in the NFL draft last week.
Absolutely. Lewis, you're the absolute best, and tremendous job by you and all of the WRAL sports department. Really looking forward to this week. It's like, it's the best being in the mecca of the college basketball world here in the Triangle.
Takes a goat to know a goat, Mark. Thank you all so much. Thank you all so much for watching another episode, watching and listening to another episode of Triangle and Two. We will see you next Monday at 5 p.m. If we don't see you before, we'll see what the Panthers do. All right. Bye.